I'm pregnant, and it's not yours. My wife told me she was carrying my childhood friend's baby and still expected me to raise it, saying it was his last wish before he died. My name's Iat Brown. I had always been the kind of man people felt at ease with. At 45, my calm voice and easy smile made me a familiar comfort in Milford, Texas, a quiet, tight-knit rural community of less than 1,000 souls. I was not just the town's trusted electrician. I was the guy who stopped to help you change a tire, the man who volunteered at the local fire station, and the neighbor who showed up unasked when someone's porch light went out. I lived with my wife Penelope, my high school sweetheart, and our 17-year-old daughter, Han, in a modest house on the south end of town, not far from where both our parents lived. Our family was well-rooted in Milford. Community potlucks on Sundays, school fundraisers, church services. I was there. Everyone knew me. Everyone liked me. He is just constant, Pastor Hulkin once said during a sermon, nodding towards me in the congregation. Like the North Star. Hey, Elliot, Sheriff Dale would shout when he passed me in town. Are you going to fix that coffee maker in my office, or are you going to keep taking your sweet time? I would laugh, adjusting my tool belt. I'm saving you from your caffeine addiction. Dale, you should be paying me for that. People trusted me. Children waved at me when I drove by in my rust-colored truck. The elderly kept my number on sticky notes by their phones. My daughter, Han, had just been accepted into a summer music camp in Austin. She played the violin, and her talent had grown beyond what the local school could offer. Penelope had been beaming for days. I can't believe it, she said one night, folding laundry while I fixed the loose handle on a kitchen cabinet. Our little one is really leaving. She's not so little anymore, I replied, pausing to look out the window where Han was on the porch swing, humming something I did not recognize. Penelope sighed. It feels like just yesterday we brought her home. I nodded. She's going to do great things. Things were good. The next morning, I visited Mrs. Watkins to fix her faulty light switch. She served me sweet tea, as she always did. You have such a good family, Elliot, she said softly. There are not many people as blessed as you. I know, I replied with a smile. Believe me, I thank God every day. But even as I said it, something in my chest tightened. I did not know why. Later that night, long after Penelope and Han had gone to bed, I sat alone on the porch. The crickets chirped and the stars blinked softly overhead. I rubbed my thumb against the calloused edge of my palm. Something was not right. The feeling would not go away. It was like a shadow at the edge of a door. It was about to open, and what would come in would be something very dark. They say fate has a way of announcing its arrival, not with a thunderclap, but with a whisper that slips into ordinary days, changing everything. For me, it came with a knock on the door and the return of Aaron Walker. Aaron had once been my shadow, or perhaps it was the other way around. As boys, we ran through the dusty roads of Milford, as if we owned the world, two kids who thought time was a long road that stretched to the horizon, but life had other plans. Aaron chased ambition out of Milford while I stayed, marrying Penelope and putting down roots in the same soil we had both dreamed of escaping. Now Aaron was back, but he was not the same. He stood on my porch one gray morning, his face pale, cheekbones sharp, eyes dulled by pain and fatigue. He looked 20 years older, not just physically, but in spirit. The diagnosis had torn something out from inside him. Stage 4 blood cancer, Aaron said softly when we sat on the porch that afternoon, drinking glasses of sweet tea. The doctors gave me a year. Maybe I did not speak at first. I just looked out at the field across the road, the wind brushing the tips of the grass like a sigh. You should have told me sooner, I finally said, my voice thick. Aaron managed a weak laugh. It would have ruined the surprise. I turned to him. Aaron smiled faintly. But you still love me always. From that moment on, I made it my business to care for my friend. I drove him to Baylor Scott and YNBXA for his appointments. I helped him pick up his medications. I cleaned his house on weekends when the nausea was too bad. And when I could not be there, Penelope often stepped in. At first I was grateful. Penelope had always been nurturing. She had that gentle way that drew people in. She cooked for Aaron, changed his sheets, bought him groceries. Sometimes she brought over board games to distract him. She even rearranged her work hours to help more often. But soon I noticed small changes. Dinners at home became quiet. Penelope missed more family meals. Then, one night, I sat at the kitchen table long after the dishes were cleared. The clock ticked louder than usual. The next week it became harder to ignore. Penelope spent hours at Aaron's house, even when I was home. One night she left right after dinner, saying he had had a rough day with chemo. I stood by the door as she grabbed her purse. I could go. He asked for me, she said quickly, not meeting my eyes. Pen, I said softly. You've been spending more time there than here. She turned. He needs help. He's not the only one, I replied, the words firmer than I intended. She blinked in surprise. What are you saying? I'm saying this house feels empty when you're not in it. That was when the first real crack appeared. Days later it widened. It was a Thursday night. I had just returned from replacing a power line at the Henderson farm. The house was dark. Han's room was closed. A plate covered in foil sat on the table, a cold pot roast. I sighed, washed up, and served myself a plate. I had barely taken a bite when Penelope walked in. "You ate?" she asked, setting down her keys. "Just started," I replied without looking up. She walked past me to the sink. "Did you talk to Han?" "She was with her friends today," Penelope replied. I stood up, setting down my fork. "Penelope, we need to talk." She froze. I took a deep breath. This can't go on. I understand Aaron is sick, I really do. But this is our home, our daughter, our life, and you've been. He's dying, Elliot. She snapped, turning sharply. He has no one. And what are we? I said, my voice rising for the first time in months. Painted on the wall. She blinked. Pain crossed her face. "I'm not choosing him over you," she said quietly. "But it feels like it," I whispered. Silence. Then she turned. "I'm going to check on him. He had a rough day?" "Of course he did," I muttered bitterly. Too low for her to hear. Or maybe not. The door closed behind her, and I was left alone in my own kitchen, the shadows on the walls stretching longer than ever. The days turned into weeks, and the silence between Penelope and me grew heavier than any words we could muster. What was once a marriage filled with shared glances, gentle touches, and whispered late-night jokes had become a ritual of silence. The bed we had shared for over 2 decades now felt like a foreign land. Every night Penelope would come in quietly, lie down next to me without a word, often with her back to me. I tried once or twice to talk, to tell her how Aaron had reacted to his treatment, or how his appetite had improved, or how weak he felt after the last round of chemo. But each time I would get out of bed and leave the room. Sometimes I would sit in the dark living room. Sometimes I would go out on the porch and watch the night, listening to the wind rustle through the dry Texas trees. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse her, but the silence I gave back was louder than anything else. One afternoon, as I sat at the kitchen table drinking a glass of water, Hen came into the room. She was still in her school clothes, her backpack half open. "Dad," she asked cautiously. I looked up. "Why is Mom never home?" she asked, not angry, just confused. "She's always at errands, even on weekends." I set my glass down gently, and then stood up. "You should ask your mother," I said without emotion and walked past her into the hallway. That night Hen did. She knocked on Penelope's door as she was folding laundry in the master bedroom. "Can we talk?" Penelope looked up. Of course. They moved to Han's room. The doors closed behind them. I could not hear what was said, but the house remained silent for a long time. The next day, Penelope left in the morning with a casserole dish and her car keys, as she had done every day that week. She spent most of the afternoon at Aaron's house, helping him eat, making sure he could get to the bathroom safely, organizing his pills by the hour. When she returned just after sunset, she walked in with dusty shoes and hands smelling of antiseptic, but something felt wrong. She turned into the hallway and stopped. Our bedroom door was open, but the space inside was empty of her presence. Her clothes were gone from the closet. Her framed photographs from the dresser, gone. Her perfume, her slippers, her robe, all gone. She ran down the hall to the guest room, and there they were, folded and stacked on the bed. Her things, her dresses, her scarves, her books. Even the small jade plant she kept on the windowsill had been moved. She stood there stunned. Pulling out her phone, she dialed my number. The call rang and rang unanswered. She whispered to the silent room. "What are you doing?" But deep down she already knew. I did not yell. I did not make a scene, but I had drawn a line. And with that silent gesture, everything between us changed. That night, I sat alone in the break room at the fire station, staring at the old framed photos on the wall. Photos of the town's 4th of July parades. A group shot of volunteers, me and Aaron among them, younger, laughing with our arms slung over each other's shoulders. I could not hate Aaron. He was dying. But Penelope, she was not, and yet she had been slipping away. The man Milford once knew, the gentle, patient me, always with a kind word, was changing quietly, steadily. The gentleness in me was fading, replaced by something harder, something colder. I did not slam doors, I did not yell, but my silence was no longer peaceful. It was the sound of something dying. And though I could not yet say it aloud, I knew in my heart. My marriage would never be the same. The days in our house grew even quieter, as if the walls themselves had learned to hold their breath. I no longer spoke to Penelope, not in the morning, not at dinner, not even in passing. I moved through the house with a silent efficiency, my presence reduced to footsteps, the rustle of my jacket, the sound of car keys being set on the counter. I was still there, but in the way a ghost might be, ever present, never truly seen. The family dinner had become a memory. The table that once hosted laughter, conversation, and Sunday roasts was now largely untouched. I ate alone, if I ate at all, usually in the garage or on the porch with a thermos of coffee, and often took her plate to her room. Penelope noticed it all, but she did not know how to fix it. Or maybe she did not try hard enough. She made attempts. Some mornings she would wake before dawn and fry eggs just the way I liked them. She would leave the container near the toaster, as she had always done, a silent gesture, an olive branch wrapped in foil. But each time she came back later, the box was untouched. I knew what it meant. One morning she stopped in the doorway as I was tying my boots. "Elliot, I made you breakfast," she said softly. I did not look up, never looked toward the source of the sound. I grabbed my keys and walked past her. To me, she was no longer a voice, just a distant sound I was now going to ignore. She stood there silently for a long time, staring at the empty space I had just left. I did not have to say anything. My silence was loud. My eyes, when they met hers in passing, said everything my mouth refused to. "Why are you not here with us? Why is my wife away from me?" Penelope went on with her days. She still went to errands, still brought him soup, washed his sheets, helped him through the pain and the appointments. But at night, when she walked past our old bedroom and saw the door still closed, her heart twisted. I did not call. She must have told herself that I was just jealous, that I still loved her, that I was angry now, but that I would get over it. I always did. In her mind, this was temporary. She stood in front of the mirror one night, brushing her hair, her reflection pale in the dim light of the guest room. "He's 45, she whispered to herself. "He's not going anywhere. He's mine. I'm his wife. I will never divorce him." She smiled weakly at her own words. But what Penelope never realized, what she never allowed herself to understand, was that even the kindest man has limits. Even a heart that gives without asking for anything in return eventually grows tired of being ignored. And when you take an honest, loving man for granted, when you mistake his silence for surrender, that love can turn to hate in a matter of moments. That afternoon, the sky over Milford hung low with heavy clouds, swollen with the threat of rain, but unwilling to burst. The kind of sky that made everything feel a little quieter, a little more tense. Penelope came home earlier than usual. She did not go to the guest room. She sat in the living room watching the door, waiting for me to return, her fingers fiddling with the hem of her sweater, her heart an unsteady drum. At 4 p.m., the front door opened. Boot on wood. The familiar clatter of keys dropping into the bowl by the entrance. I did not look at her, did not say a word. I walked straight past down the hallway and into the bedroom. The door closed with a soft click. Penelope stood, walked over, and knocked. "Eliatab," she said softly, "I want to talk to you." Silence. She knocked again, this time louder. "Please open the door." Nothing. She rested her forehead against the door. "Aaron's in the hospital," she whispered. "The doctor says his heart is giving out. He doesn't have much time left." Inside, I sat on the edge of the bed. Her words hit me like a slow-motion train, inevitable and cruel. My chest tightened. Aaron, my oldest friend, the boy I had shared secrets with, the young man who left town with dreams, the man who came back only to die, was now leaving. And yet, he was also the reason everything had fallen apart. But was he? I clenched my fists. "He's dying," I reminded myself. Why am I still blaming him? I took a deep breath, stood, and walked to the door. The knob turned, and the door swung open slowly. Penelope stood there, her eyes swollen, her hands clasped in front of her. When she looked at my face, she dropped her eyes immediately. She could not hold my gaze. I stared at her for a long, silent moment. I saw her trembling lips, her guilt, her shame, and I knew she was not finished. "What else?" I asked dryly. Penelope's eyes remained downcast. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "I'm pregnant." Time stood still. The hallway was so quiet that even the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen seemed deafening. I stood there, unmoving. Then, finally, I asked, "How far along?" It was not the question Penelope expected. She hesitated. Her voice broke. 3 months. My face did not move. "It's not mine, is it?" Penelope's head snapped up. Tears instantly flooded her eyes. "It's not yours, Elliot." "It is." I stepped closer. My eyes, so familiar and once filled with warmth, were now cold, empty pits. "Let's get a DNA test," I said, my voice quiet, detached. "Why don't I trust you?" Penelope gasped, her knees going weak, and before she could steady herself, the world tilted. She collapsed to the floor with a dull thud. Darkness. When she opened her eyes, she was still lying on the wooden floor. The room was dim. Her head ached. She turned slightly and saw me sitting in the chair a few feet away. I had not moved her, not lifted her, not offered her water or comfort. I just sat there, hands on my knees, watching. She blinked back tears, struggling to sit up. Her voice trembled. "You didn't even pick me up." I've been on the floor this whole time. My jaw tightened. My words came out low and sharp, each syllable deliberate. So now you know what it feels like to be left behind. She flinched. The words hit harder than a slap. Tears streamed down her face. She slowly, unsteadily, got to her feet. She wiped her cheek and then met my eyes. Yes, she said, her voice broken. The child is Aaron's. She paused. The pain etched into every word. He's dying, and he wanted to be a father before he went. He wanted someone to carry his bloodline. My breath grew heavier, but my posture did not change. I closed my eyes briefly, then opened them. My voice was bitter, glacial. He wants his corrupt blood passed on to another. I said, isn't that ironic? Penelope recoiled. She had never imagined that I, the gentle, noble yacht, could mock Aaron's blood cancer, but I did. Penelope's eyes flashed with rage and desolation. You're mocking his cancer, she said, her voice trembling. I smiled slowly and cruelly. At least I'm honest. Not a homewrecker. She dropped to her knees in front of me, her hands clasped, her face wet with tears. Please, Elliot, let me have this child. I'll take care of it. It was his last wish. He just wanted. I did not flinch. I did not blink. You never asked me, I said, my voice flat, venomous. You never asked me before you spread your legs for that piece of so, don't ask me to bless you for birthing a bastard. Penelope's breath caught. She stared at me in horror, as if she did not recognize the man before her. You're so cruel, she whispered. How can you talk like that about an unborn child? I rose slowly, the chair scraping lightly on the wooden floor. I looked down at her, my face like stone. Let's go, I said. Let's go pay your lover a visit. I have to look him in the eye and ask him what it feels like to stab your best friend in the back. Penelope's voice broke. Please, Elliot, don't do this. Don't hurt him. He's dying. I tilted my head and smiled. Trust me, bitch. If I wanted him dead, he would be dead by now, I said, my voice like ice. But I want to see him live. I walked to the front door, grabbed my keys, and opened it. The porch light bathed me in a pale glow. Hen was just walking up the porch steps, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She saw her mother, red-eyed and on the floor, and me standing rigid as a stone in the doorway. She froze. You told him? She asked, her voice cautious. I turned my head slowly and looked directly into my daughter's eyes. I did not speak. I smiled. And that smile was not her father's, not the one who used to sit on the porch swing and whistle while he worked, not the man who used to carry her on his shoulders during parades. That smile sent a shiver down her spine. I nodded once, then again, slowly, and smiled once more. Hen said nothing. She just stepped aside. Penelope came out behind me moments later, shuffling, grabbing her purse with trembling hands. She opened the passenger side of the truck and slid in silently. The drive to Psachi was silent. Not a word was exchanged between us. The radio was off. Only the hum of the tires on the road filled the silence. My eyes never left the road. My hands were steady on the wheel. Penelope glanced at me several times, but there was no softness left in my expression, no trace of the man she had married. We arrived at the hospital just before 7 p.m. The parking lot lights flickered in the humid night air. I parked the truck, got out, and waited. Penelope hesitated, then followed. Inside, the fluorescent glare of the hospital made everything seem sterile, surreal. I walked straight to the reception desk. I'm here to see Aaron Walker, I said calmly. I'm listed as his emergency contact. The nurse briefly looked him up on the screen, then nodded. Room 214. Down the ICU. No questions, no delays. Penelope walked behind me silently as we made our way down the long, echoing hallway. The air felt colder here. My boots echoed against the linoleum floor. My expression did not change. Penelope's eyes darted back and forth, every nerve in her body tense. At the end of the hall, we turned left. Room 214. We walked into Aaron's room. Inside room 214, the steady beep of machines and the faint hiss of oxygen filled the sterile air. Aaron Walker lay still in the hospital bed, his face gaunt, his skin pale and stretched taut over his bones. Clear tubes snaked around his arms, delivering what little help modern medicine could offer. An oxygen mask clung to his face, fogging slightly with each shallow breath. His eyes, though dim and ringed with fatigue, fluttered open at the sound of footsteps. I strode in with a measured calm, my boots tapping softly on the tiled floor. Penelope hesitated in the doorway, her eyes red, her lips trembling. I dragged a small metal stool across the floor with a long screech and placed it right next to the bed. I sat down, elbows on my knees, and leaned in close. Aaron blinked slowly, trying to focus. Hello, old friend, I said softly, the corners of my mouth curling up into a smile that did not reach my eyes. I'm here to tell you something. Aaron tried to speak, but the mask muffled his attempt. He frowned in confusion. I continued in a gentle, casual, almost kind voice. First of all, I said that bitch told me she's pregnant with your child. Aaron's eyes widened slightly. His head moved just barely. I tilted my head. Now listen very carefully. I'm going to make sure that child is born. You know why, Aaron? I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a whisper. Because I want to watch your child grow up without ever having someone to call dad. Penelope gasped behind us, but I did not turn. I want him to wake up every day and feel that emptiness, that hole. He'll go to school and see other kids get picked up by their fathers, and he will wait for someone who will never come. Aaron's hand twitched slightly on the blanket, but he was too weak to lift it. I smiled wider. Oh, believe me, he will be sad, very sad, because the man who donated his sperm to make him, I tapped the metal railing with my knuckle, will die right here in this bed. I stood up a bit, now looming over Aaron and Penelope, and laughed coldly. She will raise that bastard alone. She will never find another man to come and be a father to that child. Penelope covered her mouth. Tears streamed down her face. I looked back at Aaron, my voice now colder than the ford drip beside him. Every man who comes into her life after you, I said slowly, will come, have sex with her, and then leave after he's used her. I turned my head slowly towards Penelope, my voice now lower, more venomous than ever. That woman, I said, pointing at her without taking my eyes off Aaron, will be used like a tissue, and your bastard child will witness it. He will watch men come and go. He will see the way they treat her, and he will feel it. I took a step closer to Aaron's bed, my eyes sharp, deliberate. He will be hurt day after day, and it will fill his heart with hate, with rot, with evil. One day, he will curse you, Aaron. He will curse the man who gave him life and the woman who tore apart her marriage just to bring him into this world. He will curse you both for giving him a miserable, pitiful existence. The monitor next to Aaron's bed began to shriek. First a steady rise of beeps, then an erratic, rapid series. Aaron's chest began to heave. His breaths became shallow, fast. He clutched at the blanket, trying to speak, but no sound came out. His eyes bulged slightly behind the oxygen mask as panic took hold. His heart rate skyrocketed. Sir, you need to back away now, a nurse shouted from the doorway. Sir, step away, a doctor ordered as several medical staff rushed into the room. I stood still, calm, unmoving. I looked at Aaron one last time, my voice low enough for only Aaron to hear. I came to watch you suffer and die. Then I turned, stepping back slowly into the hallway just outside the room. The glass door slid shut behind me. Through it, I stood like a statue, arms crossed, my eyes locked on Aaron's. Aaron's gaze did not break either, even as the doctors swarmed around him, trying to stabilize him, adjusting the oxygen, preparing adrenaline, the machines screaming louder with each passing second. The two of us, once friends, brothers in all but blood, stared at each other through that thin pane of glass. Aaron's face began to contort in pain. The beeping turned into a flat, piercing tone. No pulse, one of the doctors said grimly. Time of death, 10:47. The room fell silent. A nurse stepped out into the hallway slowly, shaking her head. He's gone. I smiled, and I said it loud enough for Penelope to hear. I'll see you in hell, you bastard. She let out a choked cry, her knees giving out from under her. She collapsed hard on the cold floor just outside the room. Her head hit the ground as she passed out again. I did not flinch. I stepped aside mechanically, making way for the nurse who rushed to Penelope's side. He bent down, whispering softly to her, checking her pulse, offering support. I stood there silently, watching, unmoving, and let the nurse help Penelope. The nurse knelt beside Penelope as she wept on the cold floor of the hospital hallway. She looked up at me, as I stood nearby, calm and impassive. Can you help her up? The nurse asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. I smiled faintly, a chillingly empty smile. Her fall is her own, I said. She needs to get up by herself. I am no longer her protector. The nurse gasped, horrified at my cruelty, but I simply turned and walked away, my footsteps echoing behind me like the punctuation to my words. Outside, I pulled out my phone and called my mother. Mom, I said Penelope is at Baylor Scott. Pick her up. The lot, wait. What happened? What are you? She began, but the line had already gone dead. The next morning, my truck was gone. My phone turned off. For a week, no one heard from me. Milfer whispered. Rumors bloomed like M.O. Aaron Walker's death, Penelope's collapse, my disappearance. Then, as suddenly as I had left, I returned. That same day, a courier arrived at Penelope's door. In his hand, a sealed manila envelope, divorce papers. She read them silently, standing alone in the living room. Her hands trembled. Her chest tightened. Tears fell freely in silence. She picked up her phone and tried to call me. Still off. At dusk, I came home, parked my truck, walked inside without a word, went to my room, and changed into a clean shirt. Then I went into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of whiskey, and sat on the edge of the dining room table, sipping it slowly, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Within minutes, my parents and my in-laws arrived, alerted by Penelope's tearful calls and Han's frightened texts. My mother, Grace, stood by the door, pale and uncertain. Penelope's father, George Patterson, a soft-spoken man who rarely raised his voice, looked visibly shaken, and stood near the staircase, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face grief-stricken. Penelope came in last, her eyes bloodshot, her lips trembling. The tension was suffocating. Grace broke the silence. "Yet why? Why did you serve her divorce papers?" George spoke next. "She's pregnant, son, and you're divorcing her. She's carrying your child, for God's sake." I took another slow sip of whiskey, the glass cradled in my fingers, then I turned my gaze to Penelope. "Why don't you tell him?" I said. "Why don't you tell everyone here why I served you those papers?" Penelope's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her lips trembled. She looked down. Silent tears streamed down her cheeks. I stood, set the glass on the table, and turned to face George directly. "Your daughter," I said clearly, "slept with Aaron Walker and she is pregnant with his child." Gasps echoed through the room. "So no," I continued, my voice quiet but sharp. "Her condition, her well-being, and that child inside her are not my problem." I turned to my mother. Her eyes were wide, her mouth slightly agape. "Mom," I said softly, "that woman betrayed my trust, betrayed my love." My tone never wavered. It was as if I were reading scripture. "I pray to God every day, and I wish her all the pain and all the suffering in the world. I want to see her suffer. I want to see her cry. I want to see her raise that bastard alone, and I want to live long enough to watch that bastard curse her every day for his miserable existence." Grace took a step back, clutching her chest, her breath catching. She looked at me as if she were seeing a stranger. This was not the soft-spoken boy she had raised. This was not the man who saved people from burning houses, who fixed old wiring for free when people couldn't afford it, who loved with the kind of heart that songs are written about. No, this man standing before her was cold, vengeful, filled with venom. And as the silence thickened in the room, Grace whispered almost to herself, "What has happened to my son?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked at me helplessly. "He's filled with hate." Grace took another step closer to Penelope, her face streaked with tears. She reached out a trembling hand, touching Penelope's arm as if hoping to somehow ease the weight that pressed on the younger woman's shoulders. Then she turned slowly back to me, her voice soft, pleading. "Ayat," she said almost in a whisper, "is there any way at all you can ignore this? Can you forgive her? Save your marriage." Her voice broke under the strain of her own disbelief, her own grief. "You've been married for over 20 years. You have a life together, a daughter. Please." My face was unreadable. I turned my head towards my mother and met her tearful eyes, but my own remained cold, detached. Then, without a word, I turned back to Penelope. George stepped forward quickly. His voice trembled, but still firm. "Ayat, the child is innocent," he said. "I know what she did was wrong, but please, you're a kind man. You always have been. Think of the child's health. If Penelope is under stress, it will harm the baby. It's not the baby's fault." I did not respond immediately. I just watched Penelope, who stood motionless, her eyes swollen, her mouth slightly open as if she might speak, but could not find the strength. Every eye in the room was on me. Then I smiled. Not a kind smile. Not the smile of the man the town loved, but the smile of someone who had burned the bridge, torn up the road, and salted the earth behind him. "Every second she is here," I said quietly, "I will keep reminding her that she is filthy." Penelope gasped, her knees trembling beneath her. "I will remind her that she destroyed over 2 decades of marriage just to satisfy the twisted desire of a man destined for hell who was not her husband." I stepped closer, not to threaten, but to make sure every word landed. I would love to watch her suffer. I turned my head slightly, my eyes still on her. "And that baby," I said, my voice low and steady. "I have no sympathy or affection, nothing." My gaze hardened. "Whatever happens to it," I paused, "that's its destiny." Penelope collapsed to her knees, her sobs breaking out like floodwaters bursting a dam. She clutched her stomach, rocking slightly, unable to contain the agony that twisted through her body, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. Her cries filled the room, raw and broken. I did not flinch. I poured myself another glass of whiskey, the clink of ice and liquid strangely loud in the silence between her sobs. I leaned back on the sofa, legs crossed casually, my gaze cold, impassive. The chaos around me might as well have been birdsong. Across the room, Hen stood frozen near the stairs, watching me. I met her gaze and smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was sharp and coiled like a snake, dipped in venom. That smile did not belong to the father who used to tuck her in at night or fix her bike chain in the driveway. It belonged to someone else, someone colder, someone darker. A shiver ran through her. She turned and backed quietly up the steps, disappearing into her room, her heart pounding in her ears. George Patterson moved quickly, going to his daughter, who was now crumpled on the floor. He looked down at her, his eyes heavy with disgust and pity. He did not speak at first, just knelt and helped her to her feet. "We're leaving," he said gruffly. Grace opened her mouth to object, but George shot her a firm look, and she stepped aside. Penelope did not resist. She couldn't. She let her father guide her out of the house, her eyes glazed, her legs barely supporting her weight. George helped her into his car, closed the door behind her, and got in. The drive was silent. When they arrived back at the Patterson house, George did not even wait for Penelope to speak. As soon as she sat on the old living room sofa, he turned on her. "You've killed a good man. And for what?" "Elliot was like a son to me. He was an honest and devoted husband," he snarled, pacing back and forth. "You killed the soul of someone who would have given his last breath for you." Penelope sat still, her hands trembling in her lap. Her eyes stared blankly at the floor. George's voice rose, the fury barely contained. "Hell has a special place for women like you. If possible, abort the child and pray he gets mercy on you." Penelope flinched. Her doctor had already told her that at 45, the pregnancy was already a risky affair. Abortion was even riskier. Besides, she never wanted an abortion. She had promised Aaron his child. George pointed a stern, final finger at her. "You will stay here temporarily only until that baby is born." He stepped closer, his voice now cold. "And once it's born, you move out. Find your own way." 3 months later, the Baksashi courthouse buzzed with a quiet tension. The news had spread all over Milford that Jop Brown, the silent hero, the volunteer firefighter, the man everyone once admired, was divorcing my wife. But this was no ordinary divorce. It was a war. Penelope stepped out of her father's car, her pregnant belly now visibly round under her loose-fitting dress. She kept her chin high despite the shame she wore like a second weight. In her heart, she still believed somehow that she could fix it, that the court might order therapy, that if I were forced to sit in a room with her again, maybe I would remember the life we built. Maybe I would forgive her. Inside the courtroom was small, but it was packed. Curious eyes from the quiet corners of town filled the benches. On one side, Penelope sat with her lawyer, her hands folded protectively over her belly. On the other, I walked in moments later, immaculate in a black suit, my expression unreadable. Trailing me was my lawyer, Ron Jeremy, who had flown in on a helicopter that morning, his reputation as a ruthless litigator preceding him. The judge, an older gentleman with kind eyes, opened the session with a deep breath. He looked at Penelope, then at me, and back down at the file. Penelope's lawyer stood first, speaking with urgency. "Your Honor, in the interest of preserving a marriage that has lasted for over 20 years, we are requesting that the court order mandatory couples therapy before proceeding with any divorce decree." There was a long pause. The judge looked at Penelope, his eyes softening. He nodded slightly, as if he were already considering it. But then Ron stood. "Your Honor," he said, his voice quiet and commanding. "Couples therapy, in this case, would be a waste of the court's time and the parties' money. The bond between these two has been irreparably broken, and I believe a few questions for Mrs. Brown will make that painfully clear." The judge raised an eyebrow. "You're requesting a cross-examination now, Mr. Jeremy." "Yes, Your Honor." Briefly, the judge paused, then nodded. "Proceed." Penelope moved forward and sat in the witness stand. Her hands trembled slightly, but she steeled herself. Ron approached slowly, his tone professional, but razor-sharp. "Ron, you love your husband." Penelope answered without hesitation. "Yes, more than my life." Ron nodded. He then walked a few steps before turning sharply back to her. "More than your life," he repeated, "but not more than the promise you made when you married him to forsake all others." Penelope's lips parted, but no words came out. Ron pressed. "You claim to love him, but the child you carry in your womb does not belong to your husband. This man whom you supposedly love more than life itself," he pointed out calmly, yet bitingly. "You are a liar, Mrs. Brown. You are here now in front of the court asking to save a marriage that you willfully destroyed. How can you look this court in the eye and say you want to fix a union when you took another man into your bed?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not speak. Ron tilted his head slightly. "Was this an unconfessed wish, Mrs. Brown?" he asked, his voice like a scalpel. "A secret sexual fetish? Getting pregnant with a dying man was a twisted need to carry his legacy in your body at the cost of your husband's dignity." "Objection," Penelope's lawyer shouted, getting to his feet. "Your Honor, This is not a criminal trial. We are here to discuss reconciliation and the possibility of saving this marriage, not to humiliate the petitioner. Sustained, the judge said with a firm nod. Mr. Jeremy, please keep your comments relevant. Ron offered a slight, almost polite smile. Of course, Your Honor, he said, and then turned his gaze back to the stand. But before we discuss saving a marriage, perhaps we should first ask why it reached a point where it needed saving. He turned slowly to face Penelope once more. Who was responsible for bringing this marriage to this point? Ron Jeremy stepped forward, his sharp gaze fixed on Penelope, while the courtroom hung on every word. Mrs. Brown, he said, his tone cool but controlled. Why did you sleep with Mr. Walker? Penelope shifted in her seat, visibly uncomfortable. Her eyes darted to me, sitting motionless, jaw tight. She then turned back to Ron, her voice trembling but steady. He told me. Aaron told me he wanted to be a father, that he didn't have much time left, and he wanted his bloodline to continue. So she swallowed, so I agreed. I slept with him and I got pregnant. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Ron raised an eyebrow. His lips curled into a sneer. What a noble cause, Mrs. Brown, he said, dripping with sarcasm. So what you are saying is you didn't cheat on your husband? No, you simply granted a dying man his last wish. Penelope looked up, her eyes wide. Yes. Ron took a step forward, his voice rising by having sex with him and getting pregnant with his child. Penelope's face flushed, a mixture of shame and desperation. He wanted a child, she said more firmly now, her frustration beginning to show. He could have adopted when he had time. Ron snapped, his voice echoing off the courtroom walls. Don't insult this court with justifications for betrayal. Penelope looked down. Ron continued to press with precision. Let's move on. You got pregnant. Did you ever inform your husband before the pregnancy about this little plan of yours to carry another man's child? Penelope hesitated. I did tell him. About Aaron's wish. Ron leaned forward, his voice sharp. After you got pregnant, he said firmly. After. That's not informing. That's confessing. He turned to the judge for an instant, and then back to Penelope. So no, your husband had no idea you were sleeping with that man. You excluded him. You broke your vows, and now Ron clasped his hands together, his tone changing to something softer, but no less pointed. Now, Mrs. Brown, a very important question. What is a father? Is it the man who donates his sperm, or is it the man who raises the child? Penelope's mouth opened, but nothing came out. She looked lost, drowning in the silence of the room. Ron did not wait. You knew Aaron would die. You knew he would never be able to raise that child, and yet you went ahead. So tell us, Mrs. Brown, was it your plan all along to trap Mr. Brown into raising a child that wasn't his? Penelope's voice broke as she answered. He's an excellent husband and a great father. The child would have been lucky to have him. Ron leaned in slightly, his voice low, but sharp as a razor. So let me get this straight. You wanted to hand your husband a child you had with another man and expect him to raise it as his own. Without his knowledge, without his consent, he straightened. His final words clear and deliberate. How is that fair? Considering Mr. Brown had no idea you were sleeping with another man. He paused, then delivered the blow. That's paternity fraud, Mrs. Brown. The courtroom buzzed with hushed murmurs. A wave of discomfort washed over the onlookers like an icy wind. Ron Jeremy's last words still hung faintly in the air. Paternity fraud, Mrs. Brown. And even the judge seemed visibly unsettled, shifting slightly in his chair. Penelope sat with her hands trembling, her face pale and gaunt. Her lawyer stood quickly. I object, Your Honor, he said, trying to regain control. My client did not intend to trap anyone. This was never malicious. This marriage deserves to be saved. They've been together for over 2 decades. Ron did not let him finish. He turned swiftly, interrupting with a cool, measured voice. This marriage needed honesty, Your Honor, it needed trust. It needed the very thing all marriages are built upon. He took a step forward again, his words cutting through the room like a blade. All this marriage received from Mrs. Brown was betrayal and deceit. He paused deliberately, letting the words settle. The room fell silent again. Your Honor, Ron continued, his tone now shifting from sharp to firm. I recommend this marriage be dissolved. Let both parties move on with their lives. To force these two to be together any longer would be a cruelty disguised as reconciliation. It would only deepen the wounds and prolong the inevitable suffering. The judge leaned back, troubled. He looked at Penelope, visibly pregnant, trembling, her eyes hollow. Then at me, stoic, still calm. There was a long pause. The judge sighed. While the arguments presented are compelling, Texas law gives the court the discretion to attempt reconciliation when it believes the marriage could still be saved. He looked at both lawyers and then at us. I am ordering mandatory therapy sessions for the next 90 days. We will reconvene after that period. A stunned silence followed. Ron's jaw tightened. He turned slowly to look at me, and my expression changed. I smiled. It was not joyful, it was not kind. It was slow, deliberate, cruel. The smile of a man who knew he had gotten what he wanted, exactly what Ron had hoped to avoid. Ron swallowed and turned to look at Penelope. He walked slowly over to her, leaned down, and spoke in a low, measured tone that only she could hear. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Brown. I wanted you to be safe, but I guess I've failed." He straightened. "Good luck with that therapy session." Penelope did not look at him. Her eyes remained on her clasped hands over her swollen belly. Ron turned and walked back towards me. I was still smiling, savoring the victory I had not even voiced. Ron had known from the very first moment we sat together in his office. The calm in my voice as I explained what had happened, the way I detailed the timeline, the betrayal, the truth behind the pregnancy, without raising my voice, without a tremor. That calm scared Ron because it was not the calm of a man holding himself together. It was the calm of a man who had already burned everything inside to the ground and was now walking through the ashes without a single hint of regret. Ron had wanted the divorce finalized quickly, clean, cold, done. But fate has its own plans. The therapy session took place in a modest, softly lit office on the second floor of a quiet clinic on the outskirts of Baksachi. The furniture was deliberately unthreatening, muted tones, soft cushions, a box of tissues placed neatly on the table between us. The atmosphere was meant to invite healing, but the air inside the room was taut. Dr. Paul Kersey, a quiet, middle-aged man with silvering hair and glasses, sat with a notepad on his lap. He observed both of us silently before speaking. "Well," he began gently, "let's start with something simple. I'd like to know what each of you hopes to achieve from these sessions." Penelope looked at Dr. Kersey immediately, her hands resting on the curve of her belly. "I want to save my marriage," she said, her voice soft but trembling. "I want Yacht to understand that he's the only man I've ever truly loved. I made a mistake, an emotional one, but I want him to see that I never stopped loving him." She turned slightly towards me, her eyes pleading. "I want us to raise this child together. I know it's not his by blood, but Aaron's last wish was to be a father, and I just want Yacht to help me honor that. We've built a life, a family. I'm pleading for a second chance." Dr. Kersey nodded thoughtfully, scribbling a quick note. "Thank you, Penelope." He then turned to me. I had remained reclined in my chair, arms crossed loosely, my eyes unreadable. "And you, Mr. Brown, what do you want from these sessions?" I smiled, not with warmth. It was a slow, deliberate expression that made even Dr. Kersey pause. "I am here," I said calmly, "to tell Penelope how I feel." I turned slightly towards her, not with cruelty, but with a cold distance. "And how I feel about her unborn child." Dr. Kersey looked between us again, tapping his pen gently against the pad. "Very well, let's start with Penelope's stance." He leaned forward slightly, focusing back on her. "Penelope, why do you think your husband should take on the responsibility of raising a child that is not biologically his?" Penelope hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Why, Yotes? He's a good man, a decent man. He has been the most loving husband, the most incredible father to Han. He is everything a man should be. I know what I did was wrong, but I also know the kind of heart he has. If anyone can give this child a chance, it's him." My eyes narrowed. I let out a short sigh and let out a dry laugh before shaking my head. Then with a deliberate slowness, I turned my eyes to Dr. Kersey and said, "So the lesson here is, be a good guy and you become a cuckold with a conscience." Penelope flinched at the word. The room filled with a heavy silence. Dr. Kersey sighed, adjusted his glasses, and turned fully towards me. "Mr. Brown," he said firmly, but surely, "I was actually intending to let your wife finish sharing her side first, but I see it's time we heard yours." He leaned forward slightly, his pen poised. "You mentioned you have to share your feelings." I leaned back in my chair, my eyes fixed on Penelope. "I hate her," I said, my voice low, steady, but filled with something raw and unfiltered. Not in passing, not quietly. I hate her with every fiber of my being. Penelope flinched. Dr. Kersey looked up slowly from his notes. "Until the day I die," I continued, "I will carry that hatred." Dr. Kersey was silent for a moment and then asked calmly, "Mr. Brown, you say you hate her, but do you think holding on to that hate helps either of you, especially when there's a child involved?" I turned to him, a faint, bitter smile pulling at my mouth. It was not joy. It was the grimace of a man whose heart had been broken so completely that he could feel nothing but the shards. "That child," I said, "I never asked for it to exist. It's the manifestation of my wife's betrayal, a living embodiment of her sins. To me, it's not just a child. It's the sinister reminder, the proof. Every breath it takes, every milestone, every birthday, will remind me that my wife betrayed me and destroyed my family and my marriage. As it grows, So will my hatred for this woman and that child. Penelope's tears were silent now. They streamed down her cheeks unchecked. Her hands trembled as she kept them on her stomach. Dr. Kersey leaned in gently, his tone still even. I can't hear how much you are hurting, Mr. Brown, but the anger you carry, if you let it fester like this, could poison everything around you. I was still for a moment, then let out a short, bitter laugh. Poison, I repeated. Doctor, I am the poison. I've lost who I was now. My faith, my peace, my humanity, it's all gone. I turned slowly to Penelope, my voice quiet, even disarmingly so. May I ask her a few questions? Dr. Kersey looked at Penelope and then nodded cautiously. If it's respectful and it helps you process, go ahead. I turned to face her fully. Penelope's eyes were already wet, her expression tense. Was he good in bed? Did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy it while your husband was at home alone and depressed in his bed? Did he give you pleasure memories you can take to the grave? She tried to speak, but I cut her off gently, firmly. You are not that stupid to get pregnant just for a dying man. You may fool the entire world, but not me. You had sex with him because you wanted to have sex with him. Your pregnancy is just a play to get the world's sympathy. I still remember Aaron's eyes when I told him about the pregnancy. He had surprise in his eyes, not recognition. So, Penelope, that lie that Aaron had a last wish. I don't buy it. I think you are a liar and you just wanted to have sex with a dying man. Penelope's lips trembled. Her body gave way. She slid from the chair and fell to her knees, sobbing, shaking uncontrollably. Her voice came out broken and shattered. I was in love with him. The words hit the room like a gunshot. She cried harder, huddling on the floor. I don't know when it happened, but it wasn't just pity, it wasn't just kindness. He was dying, and I thought, she gasped, I thought it was my last chance to feel close to him, to hold him. I didn't think about what it meant. I just felt it. Dr. Kersey remained still, not judging, just listening. I stood up slowly, adjusting my shirt cuffs. My expression did not change. There was no visible surprise or further anger, just a quiet, cold resolution. I turned to Dr. Kersey. This session is over. And without another word, I walked out of the room. 2 days had passed since the therapy session. The house was lit up for Han's 18th birthday, glowing against the dark rural expanse of Melfur. Balloons and streamers adorned the living room. A modest cake sat on the kitchen table, and soft music played in the background. From the outside, it looked like any other family gathering. Yet, inside, every guest walked on eggshells. Grace sat quietly by the sofa, clutching a gift bag. George Patterson, more somber than ever, stood in the kitchen with his arms crossed. Penelope lingered near the back, her expression anxious. She had not dared to speak much since she arrived. I, cool and calm, moved through the house like a man carrying out a duty, smiling just enough, saying just enough. It was I who planned the entire gathering. I spent hours decorating the house with balloons. They had all read my text. I have an announcement to make. Please join us for Han's birthday. Even Penelope was invited. Hope filled the air, dangerously fragile. Grace believed I might be on the path to forgiveness. George prayed silently that the worst had passed. Even Penelope, who had not dared to dream, felt a glimmer of possibility. But I said nothing. I just kept pouring drinks, watching the evening unfold like a play I had already seen before. It was not until the cake was brought out and everyone gathered around the table that I finally stepped forward. Go ahead, sweetheart, I said to Han, my voice even. Make your wish. Han, beaming and hopeful, closed her eyes and leaned in, blowing out the candles. Everyone clapped. Grace leaned in, smiling. What did you wish for, little one? Han blushed slightly, and then looked at me. I wish that our family could be together again, that you and Mom could find a way back. My expression did not change. I just nodded and went into the kitchen. I poured myself a drink. Whiskey neat, no ice. The glass clinked lightly against the counter. I returned, took a seat at the head of the table, and looked at my daughter. Welcome to adulthood, Han, I said, raising the glass. It's not as sweet as the cake. Everyone fell silent. The smile vanished from Han's face. You see, I continued, swirling the drink. This is a world where wishes mean absolutely nothing. What you hope for, useless. What you want, irrelevant. This world only responds to action. I set the glass down with a dull thud. Good actions get good results. Bad choices. I looked at Penelope. Now very bad consequences. Han's voice trembled. Dad, I was just saying that it would mean the world to me if we could be together again. I smiled, but it was an empty, hollow, poisoned smile. And that's where you still don't get it. I said, your wishes are not worth a silence. I stood up, placed both hands on the table, and leaned forward. Your mother and I are done. It's over. There's no fixing this. There's no going back. There's no family as you remember it. That died the moment she spread her legs for that rotting worm. Penelope looked away, trying not to cry. Grace covered her mouth. George's jaw tightened. I turned back to Han. My voice now lowered to a low, steady, chilling calm. You see, tonight isn't about her or me. It's about you. I pointed upstairs. B, pack your bags. Han blinked. What? You heard me? I said, pack your bags. She stared at me, stunned. Why? What? What are you saying? I leaned back, finished the last sip of my whiskey, and spoke clearly. Get out of my house. Han stood motionless, her mouth slightly open, the words unable to form. Her eyes darted from me to her mother, to her grandmother, to anyone who could stop this from being real. But I was not finished. Don't be so surprised, dear daughter, I said, taking a step forward, my voice sharp as a knife's edge. You knew. You knew what she did? You knew she betrayed me, and you didn't say anything? That makes you an accomplice. Hen shook her head, tears welling. Dad, I didn't choose. Yes, you did. I cut her off. You chose to protect her. You let me live in the dark like a fool. You chose a side. I stepped closer, and you chose wrong. Penelope gasped quietly, her hand flying to her mouth. Grace looked as if she had stopped breathing. And your college fund, I continued, cool and measured, gone, liquidated. My lawyer took care of that last week. It now rests in his account. Han's hands trembled. What? She whispered. You. What are you talking about? You heard me, I said. Good luck getting a job, finding an apartment. That's adulthood, darling. It comes with responsibilities. The biggest one, I tapped my chest, is to yourself. I forgot that once. I paid the price. I looked into her eyes, and this time there was no venom, just a deep emptiness. Learn from me. Don't make the same mistake. A heavy pause. That's my last life lesson for you. I looked around the table, then stepped back. The party's over. The air was so thick with tension it felt like breathing through smoke. Then Grace stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. Without a word, she raised her hand and slapped me across the face. The crack echoed in the room. You have no heart, she said through gritted teeth. You're a monster. I did not flinch. I just turned my head slowly and smiled. Not at Grace, but at Penelope. A cruel, knowing smile. Penelope looked down, trembling. George Patterson, still silent, finally lowered his head and turned to his daughter. His voice was tired. Flat. Go upstairs, pack. You're coming home? Penelope nodded wordlessly and walked towards the stairs. Grace turned to Han and took her gently by the shoulder. Come on, darling, you can stay with me. Hen did not speak. She just walked, her eyes blank, led by her grandmother's hand. No one looked back. No one said goodbye. They all left in silence. The second therapy session was scheduled for a rainy Thursday afternoon. The clock ticked past the appointed hour, but only one chair was occupied. I sat across from Dr. Paul Kersey, legs crossed, hands clasped in my lap. A slow, steady smile spread across my face like a man who had already won a war. She's not coming, I said plainly, glancing at the clock. I suppose that tells you everything you need to know. Dr. Kersey nodded silently, jotting something down. Sometimes people need more time. I scoffed. Time. She had 22 years. The room was heavy with stillness. You still think I did wrong? I continued, tilting my head. You think I went too far by getting rid of that bitch? Dr. Kersey kept his expression neutral. Divorce is your right. No one questions that. What concerns me is the hatred. You carry too much. That kind of weight, he hesitated, not only poisons your mind, it will consume your health as well. I leaned forward, the smile never leaving my face. It's not confined to my heart, I said softly. I make sure to share it with everyone around me. It was at that moment that Dr. Kersey leaned back, unease flickering in his eyes. He closed his notebook, set his pen down slowly. I believe we're finished here. He stood, composed, but clearly disturbed. Later that night, he submitted his report to the court. This marriage is beyond reconciliation. There is no remorse, only bitterness. There is too much hate to overcome. The judge received the report, read it, and with little deliberation, approved the divorce decree. Penelope did not show up in court. She did not contest it. She did not send a lawyer. She just faded away legally. She still received half of my savings, half of my 401k. It was the law. I did not argue, did not protest. I signed the papers with a single stroke of the pen. I was more than happy to let it go. The courthouse steps were quiet as Ron and I walked out. The wind was gentle, the air strangely still. We did not speak at first, just walked together across the street to a small park bench under a dying oak tree. The leaves overhead rustled dryly in the wind, as if mimicking the silence between the two of us. I sat down with a long sigh, my hands resting on my knees. I guess this is it. So, I said, you're off to save another husband. I'm off to live what's left of this life. Ron let out a dry laugh. Yeah, I guess I go where the pain is. There's a lot of work for me. We sat there for another minute. Then we both stood. Ron offered his hand. I shook it. Take care of yourself, Mr. Brown, Ron said, turning. I nodded, also turned and began to walk, but after a few steps, Ron stopped. He turned around. Mr. Brown, he called out. I turned my head. Yeah, I might ask you for a favor. I smiled faintly. Sure. Ron looked thoughtful, almost uncertain for the first time. Not now. I'll be back. I'll talk to you in detail. I nodded once. I'll be here. We parted ways. Months passed. Spring melted into summer. The divorce was done. The house was quiet. Then the call came. It was Grace. She sounded tired, older than I remembered. She's given birth, she said softly. I did not respond. The baby is a boy. Still silence on the line. He's in an incubator. She continued. The delivery was hard. Penelope, she's not doing well. I said nothing. Grace swallowed, and just as she was about to speak again, click, the line went dead. I had hung up. Back at the hospital, doctors surrounded Penelope with clinical concern. Her body, already weakened by stress, betrayal, emotional collapse, would not hold. The baby, small and frail, fought inside the glass box. Wires covered its chest, tubes fed its lungs. 2 days later, the doctors approached Penelope with grim faces. Your son, one of them said gently, has a congenital heart defect. It's genetic. His heart is too weak. Penelope closed her eyes. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She did not ask which gene or whose fault it was. She just nodded weakly. On the 5th day, the monitors went flat. The child passed away without a sound. They told Penelope gently. She did not scream, did not move. Her eyes just stared at the ceiling. Within hours, her vital signs began to drop. Her pulse grew faint. The doctor on call saw the signs. Get a crash cart, he shouted her heart. But it was already breaking. They called it Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, broken heart syndrome. Penelope Brown died 7 days after her child died without family, without forgiveness, and without ever hearing my voice again. Hen was filled with the same hate that once filled my heart, but it was not directed at the world, not even towards her mother. It was aimed solely at me. She never forgot that night, her 18th birthday, the moment I shattered every last illusion she had of love, family, or even basic human decency. I had humiliated her, disowned her. She had only asked for peace. She left one morning with no letter, no phone call, no forwarding address. She packed a single bag, caught a bus, and disappeared. Some said she went to Dallas. Others thought maybe Houston, but no one knew for sure. Grace tried. She called me the next night. Her voice trembled. She's gone, Elliot. Your daughter is gone. There was silence on the other end of the line. Grace waited for something. Anything. I said nothing. Then click, I had hung up. After that, Grace stopped calling. Life went on, though not in any real way. The house grew silent, not peaceful, just lifeless. I barely went out. No new jobs, no visits to the fire station, no volunteer calls. The neighbors noticed, but no one said a word. The man who once saved lives now spoke to no one. Then that night came. A cold wind pushed against the windows. The world outside was still. The whiskey bottle beside me was nearly empty. One hand held the glass, the other, a small revolver. I sat alone in my living room, the only light flickering from a floor lamp with a crooked shade. In front of me hung the only remaining photograph in the house. Penelope, hand myself. I raised the gun slowly. Not to myself. Not yet. Boom. The bullet shattered the glass frame, splitting Penelope's face in half. I set the glass down, let it rest, brought the revolver to my 100. Just then the doorbell rang. I held the position for a moment longer, hands steady. Then I lowered the gun, took a long, slow sip of my whiskey, and drained it. I looked at the gun one more time. I'll empty you soon. I muttered, my voice as flat as cement. I stood and walked to the door. When I opened it, Ron Jeremy stood there in his black coat, smiling like a man who knew the moment mattered. I suppose I'm just in time, Ron said, his tone calm and practiced. I looked at him, my eyes hollow, my jaw tight. Then, for the first time in weeks, the corner of my mouth lifted slightly. I suppose a little early. Ron stepped through the doorway and stopped. His eyes immediately fell on the shattered photo frame on the floor. Penelope's face fractured behind the glass. He inhaled deeply and caught the sharp, acrid scent in the air. Gunpowder, he turned sharply to me, his voice low but urgent. God damn it. You were right, Ron muttered. I'm a little early, and I'm glad I came. I gave him a tired, hollow, but honest smile. Without asking, Ron came in further, took off his coat, and draped it over the back of a chair. I need a glass of whiskey, he said, but you're going to have some lemon water, and you're going to sit down. You're going to shut up, and you're going to listen to me loud and clear. I raised an eyebrow, but there was no challenge in me, just a subtle nod. Moments later, Ron had a glass in his hand, ice clinking as he took a sip. I returned with a glass of lemon water, and the two of us stepped out onto the back porch. The backyard was quiet under the night sky. A few crickets chirped somewhere in the distance. The two of us sat on opposite ends of an old wooden bench of the kind I had built years ago with my own hands. For nearly an hour, we talked, no yelling, no crying, just two men, one broken, the other trying to patch something together. Ron laid it all out. Something big, something that needed someone like me, someone who was done with everything, someone with nothing left to lose, but maybe, just maybe something to gain back. When Ron finished speaking, I stared out at the dark tree line behind my property. I did not speak at first, but when I did, my voice was steady. Okay. We stood together. Ron extended his hand. I shook it firm and final. Ron went out to wait by his black car. The air was cool and crisp. It was a few minutes before I came out of the house with a small duffel bag slung over my shoulder. I looked back at the house, my longtime home, the broken windows, the porch light off, the door frame cracked. This place was no longer a home, just a tomb of what once was. I turned to Ron, nodded once, and walked to the car. The drive to the nearest airfield was silent. The moon hung low when we arrived. The rotors of the helicopter Ron had chartered for this trip were already spinning, a soft mechanical hum filling the air. Without a word, we climbed aboard. 3 hours later, outside Ron's house. The air was lighter here, less heavy than the silence that usually filled my house. We walked in together. Ron pushed the front door open with a familiar groan and led me down the hall to a modest bedroom. The room was quiet, and in the center, lying in a single bed, was Jerry. The boy did not move when we entered. 10 years old, pale, his eyes too wary for someone so young. Ron walked to the edge of the bed and offered a soft smile. "Jerry," he said gently, "I brought someone for you to meet." Jerry did not even blink. I stepped forward slowly, no hurry in my walk, no forced cheerfulness. I knelt beside the bed, elbows on my knees, and looked at the boy. "Hey, kid," I said, my voice raspy but warm. "Ever heard of a show called 2.5 Men?" Jerry turned his head slightly, just enough to show he was listening. "Well," I continued, "here we are, two adult morons. And you? It seems we've got our own little version." Jerry's eyes flickered to me for a second and then darted back to the wall. Ron sighed under his breath and stepped out of the room, leaving us in that still, unresolved silence. A few minutes later, I joined him in the kitchen. I grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, twisted off the cap, and took a long drink before sitting down across from Ron at the small wooden table. "He hates you," I said flatly. Ron did not look offended. He just nodded, his shoulders slumped with the weight of 2 years of failure. "The same hate you had for your wife," he said quietly. I laughed, not a sharp laugh, but something more human than anything that had come out of me in months. "Yeah," I said, shaking my head. "Exactly the same." "Ron." He leaned back in his chair. "I've tried everything, man. I just can't get through to him." I looked up at the ceiling, exhaled, and then brought my gaze back to Ron. "You did the right thing," I said. "Both of us, the boy and me, we have something in common." Ron gave me a skeptical look. "Oh yeah, what's that?" I smiled. Not cold this time, but sad, almost peaceful. "We're full of hate," I said. "I guess that gives us a starting point." Ron was silent for a moment. Then slowly the corner of his mouth lifted. "I hope you're right." There was a long pause between us. "How's it going, Rio?" Ron turned to the kitchen window. Outside, in the morning light, a small butterfly danced through the garden and fluttered gently into the sunlight.